I've been putting together a course on how to build a React application from conception to completion. As part of that project, I built a React tabbed component, and I thought it would be fun, define fun, to show you how I did it. If you're new to the Self-Teach Me channel, my name is Amy Dutton. I'm a web designer and developer. If you're just getting into this space, sometimes it's hard to know where to start or what resources to trust. I want to help you level up and get to where you want to be. If this sounds interesting to you, hit the subscribe button below. Blah, blah, blah. This is a Next.js project. If you're not familiar with Next.js, you can head over to Next.js.org and check it out. Link in the description below. Don't worry, this is still React. In fact, if you go to their website, you'll see this is the React framework for production. But if you scroll all the way down to the Why Next.js section, you'll see all the features that you get out of the box. My personal favorite is how they handle pages and routing. First things first, let's get our project set up. If you go over to the docs page, there's a section at the very top for setup. I'm going to use Yarn, but either of these lines will work. I'm going to give this a copy and head over to the terminal and make sure I'm in my projects directory, and then I'm going to paste that sucker in. Hit enter. This will take a hot minute. It will install Next, React, and React DOM all in one swoop. About midway, it will ask you for the name of your project. I'm going to call this React-Tabs. This will also be the folder for my project. When that's done, it will list out several commands that we can run within our project. That first command, yarn dev, is what we want to use. Okay, we need to navigate into our project directory. So I'm going to say cd for change directory, and then my folder name is called React-Tabs. And now we can run yarn dev. By default, this will get our project running on localhost 3000. I'm going to click on that and head over to the browser, and you should see something like this. Sweet, everything is up and running. Let's open our folder of code within VS Code. You'll see that the create script we ran generated quite a few files. If you open the pages directory, you'll see an index.js. Let's open that up. And this is actually the code that's displaying the starter screen in the browser. I'm gonna get rid of most of this. I'm gonna get rid of the footer and everything that's inside the main tag and this class name on main. Just for fun, again, define fun. I'm gonna change the title inside the head tag. This is the head block that usually contains your metadata. I'm gonna make this say React Tabs. Okay, let's give that a save, and now let's go back to our browser. You should see a blank page, and the title inside the tab should say React Tabs. Perfect. Let's look at a few more things before we really start coding this thing out. Within VS Code, let's open the styles directory, and you'll find all of our CSS. I actually prefer style components to Next.js's system, but since we're building a quick one-off component, we'll stick to their system in the styles folder. There's a globals.css and a Home.module.css. These do what you would probably expect them to do. Globals.css controls the styles across the entire application, and Home.module.css controls the styles on the home page. Since we got rid of all the content on the home page, we can blow away most of this file. I'm going to keep the container class, except I'm going to leave some padding just to bring our content away from the browser's edge. Last thing, I'm going to create a components directory. And here we'll put the code for all of our tab component. Okay, now for the meat.
We have the meat.
I think the easiest thing to do is to style everything out first and then layer the JavaScript on top. So let's create a folder within our components directory for our tab component to live in. We're creating a folder for this so we can keep all the files and pieces like styles and tests for our component together. Inside that tabs folder, let's create a new file called Tabs.js. I'm going to name my file to have the same name as the component. That way when I'm editing the file, it's really obvious which component I'm working on. I can see the file name Tabs.js in the tab on VS Code. Real quick, I'm just going to stub this out. I have the ES7 React snippets extension running. I'll include a link in the description below. And what this allows me to do is type RAFCE and then hit enter, and that'll give me a template to use. Next.js automatically includes React, so I can get rid of the import at the top. Then at the bottom, I use named exports for everything. Consistency in code is a good thing, and I don't have to wonder if this particular component is a named export or a default export when I know they're all named exports. I'm just gonna put the text tabs inside this as a placeholder so that when we put the component on the page, we'll know that everything's working. I'm gonna show you a little trick. So this tabs component is ultimately going to live on our home page. So let's go there. Let's open up that pages/index.js file and import this component. Import tabs from components, tabs. This looks gross to say tabs/tabs. If we'd used index.js for our component name, then we could have just said tabs, since it will automatically look for index.js inside that tabs folder. But remember, I didn't want a bunch of components all with the same file name. We can put an index.js file inside our tabs directory that points to the right folder. I'll show you. Let's create a new file inside our components/tabs folder with the name index.js. Inside, I'm going to import our component and export it right back out. Now on our home page, we can leave it like this, import tabs from component/tabs, and then let's display our component within main. Give that a save. Now if we open up our browser, we should see a blank page with the word tabs on it. Cool. Now let's add a few more files to our tabs directory to finish stubbing it out. I'm gonna create Tabs.module.css for our styles, and for CS modules to work, you have to have that .module.css. Perfect. With everything set up, we can dig our heels in. Within Tabs.js, we want to display our tabs across the top, and we can do that with an unordered list. So we'll add a UL tag and a list item tag and name our tab tab1. Real inventive. And hit Command Save, and VS Code will reformat everything. I have an extension running called Prettier that does that for me. I'll include a link in the description below. Let's duplicate our li tag a couple times and make this tab2 and tab3. Let's make a content area below with a paragraph of lorem ipsum. And of course, this content will change based on whatever tab we click on. The way that styles work within Next.js, we'll need to import our CSS file at the top. So import styles from, and then we're in the same directory, and we want to pull in that Tabs.module.css. Then, to make these things a little easier to style, I'm going to put a class on our UL. So instead of saying class name equals tabs, we're going to use this syntax, styles.tabs. Now in our CSS file, we can give that a definition. I'm just going to give this a background of red so that we can see how this is working. Okay, great. So everything is connected and working. To make this a little bit easier to see what I'm doing, I'm going to rearrange these windows a little bit. Okay, first let's get rid of that red background, and we can get rid of our bullets by saying list style is none. Then we want to get rid of some of that default padding. So I'm going to say padding 0, margin 0. We can use Flexbox to get all our tabs to display on the same line. And let's add a border to the bottom to help separate the tabs from the content. Now for the actual tabs, let's add a little bit of spacing. I want to be able to style the active tab. In our JSX, we want to be able to give one of these tabs a class name of current. Then within our module.css file, we want to make the text blue. Let's give it a font weight of bold. We can put a border around the tab, but we don't want a border on the bottom since we already have a bottom border on our tabs class. I can override that by listing a border bottom below this border definition here. Then I want the top corners to be rounded, so I can say border top right, radius is 5 pixels, and top left radius is 5 pixels. This tab needs a little bit of space, so let's go back to our li definition. And we already have margin on it, and that's the space outside the border, but we still need something on the inside between the content and our border. So we can say padding 0.5 ems There we go. Now we don't want the blue border immediately under our tab. We want it to look open, like we're actually on that tab. Okay, let's fake it. We can give our tab a background of white. So on the current tab, background white. And then let's give it a position of relative so that it moves relative to where it is right now. Then 2 pixels from the top because that's the size of the border. So give that a save. You'll see it slides down. Looking good. Just to give it a little bit more space from the edge of the browser, I'm gonna go back to our Home.module.css and bump this up to 2 rems. Now let's add a class to our content area. So here, I'm gonna say class name, do styles.content, and go back over to our Tabs.module. Then within our module.css, I'm going to give this a little bit more padding. So say 1M, 2Ms. I'm gonna add some more content so they have something to work with. I'm gonna wrap each of these blocks of content with a div tag and give them all their own header. Save, and then I'll duplicate this block a couple times so that each tab will have its own block. And I'm going to change this to tab 3, tab 2. Then I'm going to change some of the text within each of these blocks to make it easier to differentiate between them. So if we look at this within the browser, you should see all the content stacked up on top of each other. Awesome, now we just need to make this dynamic. A tab component is kind of an interesting problem because when you're placing everything, you really have data in 2 different locations. You have the tabs at the top, and then you have the content area elsewhere on the page that you're trying to control. Let's go to our home page. We want to be able to pass in all the content from the home page to this tab component, and that way we can reuse our component throughout our application. Okay, within the tabs, I'm going to cut all the content. I'm going to put a comment here as a placeholder. And we want to paste it on the home page in our tabs component. We're passing all this content into our component as a child. So on the Tabs.js file, let's let our component know that we're expecting it. Now where we had all of our content displaying, technically we could just say children. And it'll display all the content that we passed in, but actually I want to loop through each block of content separately. It'll make a little bit more sense in a minute why we're separating everything out, but essentially it'll make it easier to associate the right content with the right tab. So we can say children.map. You can think of map like a machine. It's gonna take each item that we put in and give us something back in return. If we go back to the home page, I'm gonna collapse all this content down to make it easier to visualize. Each of these divs represent a block of content, and each one of these is a child, and collectively, these are all children of this tabs component. Going back to Tabs.js with map, it takes a function. We're gonna pass it each div from the home page one by one to do something with it. And while it's going through this map machine, we're gonna reference the current div that we're processing, so each of those tabs, as a child. But technically we could name this anything we want. We could call this tabbed content if that's more readable. A lot of times I'll name this 1 to remind me that I'm handling one item at a time. And then we need to tell it to do something with each item inside of this particular function. So we want it to display this div with our content inside. So 1.props.children. This might look a little confusing, but the content that we're passing in, so the stuff inside this div, is just like another child. It's what's nested inside the one item that we're passing in. So I'm gonna refactor this really quick to use an arrow function. Sometimes I think it's easier to visualize when it's listed out like this. So we can just say 1, get rid of these curly brackets. If we go back to our browser, the results should look very similar to what we've seen before. The main difference is that there should be more space between each block of content, since we're wrapping each block with that content style that has the padding applied to it. Now that our content is passed in dynamically, we need our tab labels to be passed in dynamically too. And we need them to be related to our content. So let's go back to our homepage and add our label names. On our home page. On the div for each block, I'll add a label and then the name of that tab. So tab 1, tab 2, and tab 3. I just made up the name label, but this is just like a prop that you'd pass in on a component, and you access it just like you'd access a prop. So within our Tabs.js, let's display it the same way that we displayed our content. So children.map, and we're gonna look at each tab individually, and we want it to return this tab, and the name is gonna be tab, since we're calling it tab here, .props.label. We can get rid of that and give that a save. If you look at this within your browser, you may have noticed a couple of errors within your console. Each child on the list should have a unique key prop. This is pretty easy to resolve. All it's saying is that when you loop over items, like within the map function, each item needs to have its own key to help React keep track of all the items. Since each label name should be unique, you can use that as your key. Okay, I can update the tab section to say key tab.props.label. And then within the content area, we can say basically the same thing, except down here we called it 1. So let's say 1.props.label. Give that a save. If we go back to our browser, you'll see that the errors are gone. Now all of our content is being passed in dynamically, and the cool part about this is you could pass in anything as content. So I could even pass in other components like graph. It doesn't have to be just text. Okay, I'm gonna undo that and go back to our Tabs.js file. The last thing is we need to be able to add some state so we can specify which is the active tab. Since we're using functional components, we can use hooks for state. Woo-hoo. I'm going to import the use state hook here at the top. Then at the top of the component, we can declare our state. And the way this works is we will say const and then destructure an array. So the first item is what we want to name our state. This can be anything we want. I'll give it active tab. And the second item is the same name, so active tab, except it has to have set in front of it. This is actually a function that will allow us to change the value for active tab. So then we'll call our hook use state. We can also initialize the active tab value by passing something into use state. So when the page loads, we want the active tab to be the first tab's content. So we can say children 0.props.label. So this should look somewhat familiar. Remember, the children are the 3 divs that we passed in, and so we're grabbing the first one, tab 1, with these square brackets. The weird thing about arrays in programming is that there's 0 base, so the first item is 0, not 1. If we put a 2 in the square brackets, we'd be grabbing the third item. Then we're grabbing the props here, so anything passed in on that individual tab, and we want that label, so .label. We can test this. Let's go over to our browser. Everything looks the same visually, but I have React Dev Tools installed. I'll include links to install them in the description below. Now, if I go to the developer tools, just hit Command-Shift-I, and I have an additional tab down here called Components. We've used this arrow here to select an element on the page. In the Components panel, there's another arrow directly below that where we can select a React component. So I'm going to select our tabs, and you'll see that it's highlighted in the tree. And then we can see the details about this particular component. And the part that we're looking for is in this hooks section where it says state tab 1. Within our code, let's change the way that tab looks by applying the CSS current class. So within our list item, we'll add a class name, and then we'll use a conditional shorthand to say if the label, so tab.props.label, and remember this is what we're referring to as our key and it's what's being displayed out on that tab, is equal to the active tab. That's what's being set up here. This is our state. Then we want to use styles.current, otherwise use nothing. Perfect. Then we'll add a conditional. So we'll change this to curly brackets. Say if one.props.label equals active tab. Then we want to return this block of code here. This syntax looks a little different. With this block of code, we can use the if statement because we're in our map function. The other was in a class name value, so we have to use the shorthand syntax instead. Some of that is just the quirks of React, and either way though, the logic is the same. Next, we need to be able to navigate in between each of our tabs. Let's wrap the content within our li tag with a link. When we click on this A tag, we want to change the active tab state. So first, let's write the function above the return statement. We'll say const handle click. By default, when you click on the link, the browser will take you to that location. We don't need that. We're handling all of that through JavaScript. So if we pass in the event, I usually like to use E as a shorthand, then we can say e.prevent_default. If you're confused about where that came from, the event is automatically part of JavaScript events. So our click and prevent default is just something that came from JavaScript out of the box. Now we can use our set active tab to pass in a new value. And we want to pass it the label name for the tab that we just clicked on. So we can add that to our function as something that we'll pass in. So we'll say new active tab. Okay, so let's go back to our A tag and tell it to use this handle click function that we just created. So on click, use the handle click function. Except since we're passing parameters to our handle click method, we need to send our event and label over. So we can use a function when on click is called, and we automatically get our event data, or E as we're calling it. So we can pass that in. And then we also need to be able to send it the label that we've been mapping over. So we can say tab.props.label. Let's refactor this real quick to use our arrow function. So I'm gonna say handle click, give that a save, and come over to our browser, and now we should be able to click between all of our tabs. Awesome, 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 awesome. As I'm looking at our code, we're using this tabs.props.label quite a bit. So let's make it a little easier to read before we move on to our next thing. With this arrow function, this is an implicit return. We're implying that we're returning this li block. But if we use curly braces to wrap this whole block, and I have an extension through VS Code called rainbow brackets. So we'll color code these bracket pairs for me. I'll include a link in the description below. Okay, so now we can say return this li block, and we can give this label its own name. So I'm going to say const label equals tab.props.label. And now I'm going to highlight tabs.props.label and hit Command D again and again to highlight each of these 4 instances, and then I can just replace all of them with label. This is looking so good, and we could call it quits here, but there is one more thing. There's always one more thing, right? How do I send someone directly to tab 2? Right now, they'd have to come to the home page and manually click on tab 2. I would rather send them a URL that would drop them, that would automatically take them there. This is part of the reason we set the project up on Next.js. We can use their router methods to push a new URL that we can associate with the active tab. We're going to use as the URL. How about tab label? We've been using it in other places to specify the active tab. That works, except these labels aren't always URL friendly. In ours, there's a space, but who knows? There could be a special character that could throw the whole thing off. I'll spare you the drama. We can use tab label, but push it through a function that would turn it into a valid slug. It will remove any unfavorable characters or symbols. This feature isn't specific to our tabs component, so I'm going to create another folder inside our root directory called utils, short for utilities, and add a file inside called slugify.js. That way, if we ever want to use this function anywhere else in our project, it will be easy to access. Now, I cheated a little bit. I Googled and I found this gist. It does exactly what we want it to do. It has some regex in there and looks for accents, white spaces, dashes, and turns it into a nice URL. I'm going to copy and paste this into our Slugify file. And then I'm just gonna change the name of our function to Slugify and make sure that we're exporting it so that we can bring it into our component. One quick thing, let's add a little bit of documentation to the top. Let's say what it does. So it turns a string into a slug. Whenever I grab code snippets like this off the internet, I like to put a reference to where I grabbed it. That way if I or someone else ever need to revisit it, we can. I'm gonna say reference and then grab that URL. At the top of Tabs.js, let's import our function. So I'm gonna say import Slugify from utils Slugify. So now where do we use this? We know when we click on a tab, we want the URL to update. So we could put it inside our handle click method, but really we want the slug to change anytime state changes, anytime that active tab variable changes. React has a hook called useEffect that will watch a piece of state. So at the top, let's import useEffect. So at the top, let's import our useEffect. So scroll back down and say useEffect. And the first parameter is a function that says what we want to happen. And the second parameter is an array of when we want it to run. So for us, anytime active tab updates. Let's jump over to Next.js.org and open up their documentation on routers. So I'm gonna click on docs and then scroll down and click on next/router on the left. So at the top, there's some example code. So we'll import our use router and we'll give it a variable, so const router, and call our hook use router. Then we'll reference it with router.push. So this is where we're pushing an update to the browser's history. So if we scroll down to router.push, you'll see some more information. It looks like there's 3 different parameters: URL, as, and options. So let's use this within our code. Like we saw in the example, it's imported at the top. So import use router from next/router. And then let's call our router hook right below our state. So I'll say const router use router. Let's go down to our useEffect and add our push code. So I'll say router.push, and the first parameter is our URL. So we'll say Slugify active tab. The second parameter is as, so we can just leave that as undefined. And then the third parameter, we want to set shallow to true to say we don't need to re-render the page every time, just the component itself. So let's give that a save and go over to our browser. Oh brother, we're getting a 404. That's because it's looking for a page tab-1, and tab1 isn't a page, it's a parameter. So really our URL should look like question tab equals tab-1. The question mark says that we're passing in variables through the URL, and we can use this to build a string within our router.push. So let's copy this and paste it into our code. And then I'm gonna wrap this in backtick so that we can use string interpolation to inject our JavaScript variables. So the localhost 3000 part should be dynamic because we want this component to work whether it's on the home page or an about page. With router, there's a path name property. So I can just say router.pathname. We're using a $sign with curly brackets to say that this is JavaScript. We want you to process it and inject it into the screen. Okay, tab1 should be dynamic based on whatever tab we clicked on. So this is where we can use our Slugify function for earlier. So I'm gonna cut this, and we want to use that $sign and curly brackets again and paste in that function. So give that a save, and let's go back to our browser and let's get rid of that. Okay, so now if I click on these tabs, awesome, look, the content's changing and our URL is changing with it. Now, what if we come to the page and it's set to the 3rd tab? We need to honor that. Hit return, you'll notice it jumps back to tab1. Unfortunately, Next.js is a little weird about reading the URL query within a useEffect hook. Apparently it needs to hydrate the content first, In fact, I was reading through GitHub issues while I was prepping for this video, and there's a PR out there that will supposedly check to see if the router is ready, but that code hasn't been merged yet, so we'll need to go about this a little bit differently. With Next.js, you can call get initial props. So let's pull up the documentation. So at the top, it's telling us what get initial props does. It enables server-side rendering in a page and allows us to do initial data population. So good. Okay, so if we scroll down to caveats, it will tell us that get initial props cannot be used in children components, only in the default export of every page. Okay, so and then right above this, it just tells us about the context object. So this is useful for knowing what information we have access to, and we want the query, so we want to know what tab that we're passing in. So let's go back to our home page code, and at the top here, we want to import use router from next router. And then at the bottom of the file, we want to call our get initial prop. So I'll say home, because this is the home page, home, get initial props. And we want to get the query and return it to the page component. So then back at the top where we define our home component, let's make sure that query is getting passed in. Then where we call our tabs component, let's pass in the query as the initial tab. So let's go back to our tabs component, and then we can list the initial tab as a prop that's getting passed in the component. Then let's use our use effect hook again. Remember, the first parameter it takes is a function where we can specify what we want to happen. The second parameter says when we want that to happen. So if we left it blank, like it is right now, it will run every time the component updates, and we don't need that. We just need it to run once, right after the component is loaded onto the page. So in order to do that, we can pass it some empty square brackets. Now, within the function, we want to check to see if the initial tab has been set. So if we've passed in an initial value within our prop up here. If it has, then we want to set the active tab to what we passed it. And then just for fun, let's console log this value out. Let's jump back to our browser and see how things are looking. Okay, so first I'm going to change this to just say localhost 3000 with nothing after it. Okay, great. It defaults to the first tab and it's showing content, and then clicking between the tabs still works. Okay, so now with another tab selected, so I have tab 3, I'm going to refresh the page. Okay, now this is strange. The URL says that we're still on tab 3, so that's good. It's not defaulting back to tab 1, but it's not showing our active tab, and we don't have any content loading on the page. So if we look in our console, it says that the active tab is tab-3. And if we start clicking around, the other tabs seem to load. So what's happening? Let's add another console.log inside of our active tab hook and see if we can figure this out. So I'm going to say console log active tab. We'll give that a save and go back to the browser, and let's hit refresh. Same thing, except here we can see that the query passes in tab 3 the first time it loads, and then it defaults to tab 1, and then it sees the initial tab and passed in tab 3. I'm going to click on tab 3, and tab 3 contents loads in. Okay, so this is where programming can be tedious, and you really have to pay attention to the details. When it gets the initial data, it grabs the content from the URL from our query. So that's tab-3. It's that slugified version. But when we set the active tab, it just uses the label. So it goes back to tab 1. Okay, so the difference here is a slugified value versus the plain text. So we just need to make sure that all of our data is formatted the same way. Let's use the slugified value. This will be easier to use since we don't have to worry about capitalization or special characters, and we already have a function that will convert the string for us. In Tabs.js, let's go to the handle click function. So where we set the active tab, remember this is where we're updating our state. Let's make sure that the new active tab has been slugified. Let's scroll down a little bit further to our list items of tabs. So on the class name, we're checking to see if the label is equal to the active tab. We need to make sure that the label has been slugified. So let's wrap that with our slugify function. And then let's come down a little bit further and the same thing down here. I'm gonna make sure that that label has been slugified. Cool, so let's give that a save and a refresh. And everything is working just like we want it to. What a doozy. In next week's video, we're going to revisit this project and add testing. Woo-hoo. Testing is often overlooked, but it's so important because it gives us confidence that our code is working and won't break. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm working on a course that shows you how to build an application from conception to completion. That's right, we start with absolutely nothing and build out a full-fledged application. If this is something you think you'd be interested in, there's a link in the description below and you can find more information and get on the waiting list to receive early bird perks. As always, I've posted the code that I've written here on GitHub, link in the description below. Feel free to download it, fork it, use it, modify it, whatever. If you like this video and want to see more videos on web design and development, hit the subscribe button below. Hit the bell icon if you want to receive notifications when new videos are posted. Until then, keep coding. Okay. So what did they decide?